Progressive logic goes something like this. Many of the men who signed the Declaration of Independence, including Thomas Jefferson, who wrote it, owned slaves. Therefore, the Declaration is invalid, because if they own slaves and we know slavery is evil, that must make this document invalid. But it is not. It is a very sad reality that the left has a very hard time appreciating the universal merits of the Declaration of Independence, because they are so hung up on the issue of slavery, and they are wrong. Please do not take my words for these things. Please do your own homework. To be clear, because people love to take things out of context, slavery was horrible. It is a total stain on our history. But defending the Declaration of Independence is not an effort to excuse any aspect of slavery. It is to show you the genius of a country. People will say, how could the founders approve the phrase, all men are created equal, when many of them owned slaves? How did they miss that? Well, they didn't miss that. In fact, it was Thomas Jefferson that included an anti-slavery passage in his first draft of the Declaration. In the first draft, in his own handwriting, the paragraph blasted King George for condoning slavery and preventing the American colonies from passing legislation to ban slavery. He wrote, and I quote, "He," meaning the king, "has waged cruel war against human nature itself, violating its most sacred rights to life and liberty in the persons of a distant people who never offended him, captivating and carrying them into slavery in another hemisphere. He is determined to keep open a market where men should be bought and sold. He has prostituted his negative for suppressing every legislative attempt to prohibit or restrain this execrable commerce." We don't say execrable very much anymore, but it means detestable, abhorrent, an abomination, very, very bad. So this is Jefferson talking to the king. He's capturing these people, he's selling them on the open market, and he won't allow us to stop it. That's in the original Declaration of Independence. So why wasn't it in the next draft? Jefferson was actually really angry when Georgia and North Carolina threw up the biggest resistance to that paragraph. It was those two states. Ultimately, those two states twisted Congress's arm to delete the paragraph, because before they started this process, we all have to hang together or we shall hang separately. They knew they had to stay together or the king would stop the revolution. So the next argument would be, I guess, how could a guy calling the slave trade utterly detestable be a slave owner himself? There is no doubt about this. As a human being, Thomas Jefferson was very flawed. He had slaves from his estate in Virginia attending him while he was in Philadelphia, in the very apartment where he was writing the Declaration. The problem is, Virginia law made it more difficult for slave owners to free their slaves, especially if the owner had significant debts, as Jefferson did. Many of the Southern founders deeply believed in the principles of the Declaration, yet they couldn't bring themselves to upend the basis of their livelihood. Jefferson also went back and forth and said, "We have the wolf by the ear, and we can't continue to hold him, but we also can't let him go." They were afraid that the slaves in the South would rise up and kill everyone for vengeance. The founders were not idiots. The founders wanted to end slavery, and they understood the ramifications of signing to the principles described so eloquently in the Declaration. They understood that logically, slavery would eventually have to be abolished in America because it was unjust, and the words they were committing to paper said so. The Declaration did not enable and further slavery. In fact, it took a major step towards crippling the institution. It made the argument for the very first time in human history that the fundamental right of all humans existed, and that undermined slavery. Planting the seeds to end slavery is not nearly commendable enough for leftist critics. But you cannot discount the fact that the seeds were planted. It is as if you would say, you are not stopping abortion today. Or if you're on the other side, you're not just making all abortion, including Peter Singer's idea of up to 2 years old, legal. No, progress, progressivism. You have to take the small steps and convince the people, or it's war. What they did is they started an expiration clock for slavery by approving the Declaration. Everything that happened almost a century later to end slavery, and then a century after that with the Civil Rights Movement, flowed from the principles voiced in the Declaration. In fact, Martin Luther King quoted the Declaration a lot. Now, ironically, for a movement that calls itself progressive, it is obsessed with retrying and judging the past over and over again. Progressives consider this a better use of time than actually putting past abuses in the rear view and striving not to be defined by our ancestral screw-ups. It can be constructive to look at the past, but only if you're trying to learn from it to not make the same mistakes. Examining history can be useful in providing a roadmap for the future. And we have a very obvious one that as a nation, we're not consulting. But it's right there. It's under glass. It is faded because it sat in the sun for so many years. But this is what we are. That we hold these truths to be self-evident. That all men are created equal. That means at birth, we're all equal. There's no king. There's nobody that has something that I don't have. No right that I have somebody else doesn't have. They're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's an aspirational goal. That's what founded America. The words don't die. The ink can fade. We can even forget them. But those words do not die as long as we continue to discuss them.